Welcome to the Celeb Daily News. You are watching a moment in history that is so staggering, so layered, and so fundamentally transformative that it demands your absolute attention. We are witnessing a political and financial earthquake that isn't just shaking the foundations of the Capitol, it is threatening to tear the very fabric of American democracy apart. What I am about to lay out for you happened just 3 hours ago, and if you don't grasp the mechanics of this collapse right now, you will be completely blind to the chaos that is scheduled to unfold over the next 48 to 72 hours. This is the definition of a stress test, a collision of all three branches of government that constitutional scholars have dreaded for decades, but never truly believed they would see in their lifetimes. Before we dive into the catastrophic details, do me a favor. Smash that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. In a landscape of partisan theater, you need deep dive reporting that tracks the actual institutional shifts before the narrative gets spun out of control. We are tracking a 96-hour countdown that will determine if the institutions we have leaned on for 249 years can still hold weight. At precisely 10:47 this morning, Eastern Time, the Supreme Court of the United States handed down a decision that didn't just punish Donald Trump, it effectively erased his corporate identity. We are talking about mere fines or manageable penalties here. We are talking about a unanimous 9-0 ruling ordering the immediate and total dissolution of the Trump Organization. This is complete liquidation. Every single asset, every binding contract, and every piece of iconic property bearing that name is to be sold off to satisfy judgments totaling a staggering $487 million. Think about the scale of that for a second. This isn't a slap on the wrist. It is a corporate execution. Within 11 minutes of the ruling hitting the wire, the financial system reacted with primal instinct. Trading was halted on 3 separate Trump-related securities. By noon, Deutsche Bank had already circulated an internal memo to its entire wealth management client base. By 2 p.m., the Treasury Department was forced to convene an emergency briefing. The system didn't just notice this ruling, it moved to protect itself from the fallout. The language used in the court's opinion, authored by Chief Justice John Roberts, is something I have never seen in a modern judicial ruling. It didn't just cite legal errors, it described a persistent and systematic fraud conducted over multiple decades, specifically designed to evade lawful oversight while profiting from institutional trust. That isn't the description of a clerical mistake or a difference in accounting philosophy. That is a Supreme Court justice describing a criminal enterprise that has been operating under the shield of a corporate structure. But while the media is going to spend the next week obsessing over the money, the skyscrapers, and the personal reaction from Mar-a-Lago, they are fundamentally missing the real story. The real story isn't about the gold on the buildings, it's about the number 9. You have to understand the current climate of this court to realize how truly historic this moment is. Over the last 10 years, this bench has been defined by its fractures. We have seen them split 5-4 on voting rights and 6-3 on abortion. They have argued over gun control, religious freedom, and the limits of executive power. This is a group of jurists who usually fight over the placement of commas and the interpretation of footnotes. But on the matter of the Trump Organization's systematic fraud, 9 justices appointed by 5 different presidents and representing 4 decades of wildly different judicial philosophies found complete and total unanimity. There were no dissents. There were no separate opinions. There wasn't even a concurrence to explain a different path to the same conclusion. There were just 9 signatures on a single, devastating ruling. And here is the detail that should send a chill through the former president's legal team. The 3 justices he personally appointed, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, signed on without a single hesitation. These are not partisan activists or holdovers from a previous administration looking for a political win. These are conservative jurists who owe their current positions to Trump himself, and yet they just voted to dismantle his entire business empire. When your own appointees refuse to protect you, it isn't a matter of politics anymore. It's a matter of credibility. These justices hold lifetime tenure, they answer to no one, and face no elections. Their only currency is their legacy in the eyes of history, and all three Trump appointees decided that their judicial reputation mattered more than loyalty to the man who elevated them. They looked at the evidence, and they found it so overwhelming that to rule otherwise would have destroyed the court's legitimacy forever. This brings us to the precipice of a constitutional crisis that stretches far beyond the bank accounts of one man. The American system is built on a simple, fragile theory. The executive cannot be a king, and the court exists as the ultimate check on power. But that framework only functions if the participants agree to the rules. If a leader can simply look at a Supreme Court ruling and say no, the entire architecture of the republic collapses. We are about to see what happens when a former president, who still commands the loyalty of nearly half the country, decides that the Supreme Court is an illegitimate body because its ruling doesn't suit him. That isn't a legal debate. That is a question of power and legitimacy, and those questions are rarely settled in a quiet courtroom. They are settled in the streets and through direct institutional confrontation. The founders made a critical, perhaps naive, assumption. They assumed that anyone holding high office would ultimately submit to the rule of law. They believed that losing in court meant accepting the loss and moving on. They never accounted for a figure with enough political gravity to convince millions of people that the court itself has no authority. We are already seeing the first cracks in the dam. At 1:43 p.m. this afternoon, the response came across Truth Social. It wasn't just anger, it was a declaration of independence from the judicial branch. Trump wrote, and I am quoting this directly because of its weight, "This illegitimate court has no authority over me or my property. I will not comply." Let that sink in. A former president of the United States is openly defying a unanimous Supreme Court order. In our history, that has happened exactly once before, and the parallel is terrifying. In 1832, President Andrew Jackson famously ignored Chief Justice John Marshall's ruling on Native American sovereignty, leading to the Trail of Tears and a legacy of institutional rot that eventually contributed to the Civil War 30 years later. But there is a difference today that makes our situation even more volatile. Jackson had his party and the majority of the country behind him. Trump is facing a fractured party, a looming election, and multiple criminal trials that are all accelerating at once. We are now watching 4 separate institutional dominoes beginning to tip. And if even one of them falls the wrong way, we are in territory this country hasn't navigated in over 160 years. The first domino is the enforcement crisis. You have to remember that the Supreme Court has no army, it has no police force. It relies entirely on the executive branch to carry out its will. If Trump refuses to liquidate, the Department of Justice has to act. The SBI has to execute those orders. Federal marshals have to physically seize the properties. Imagine the optics. Federal agents using force against American citizens who have gathered to protect the property of a former president. If they use force, they create martyrs. If they back down, the court's authority is dead. It is a choice between 2 different versions of institutional failure. And the people tasked with making those choices aren't abstract entities, they are individual agents and lawyers who have seen what happens to anyone who stands in the way of this movement. They know the threats and the danger that come with doing their jobs. The second domino is the fracture of the Republican Party. I can tell you right now that internal, unreleased polling from a top GOP consulting firm shows a party splitting in real time. When asked if they support defying the Supreme Court, 72% of MAGA Republicans said yes, while 68% of traditional Republicans and 81% of independents said no. That isn't a political coalition. That is a civil war waiting for a spark. On Capitol Hill, the private conversations are even more desperate. Sources indicate that several Republican senators are already discussing legislation to enforce the court's ruling. If they break publicly, the party fractures permanently, and neither side will have the numbers to win a national election ever again. The third domino is international. Our allies aren't just watching this, They are recalculating their entire relationship with the United States. We've already seen diplomatic statements from the German Chancellor and the Japanese Prime Minister that suggest they no longer view the American government as a stable partner. When international confidence collapses, adversaries like China and Russia move. They are watching our internal gears grind to a halt and calculating if this is the moment to strike, while we are distracted by our own institutional decay. The fourth and most dangerous domino is electoral legitimacy. If Trump defies the court and faces no consequences, there is no reason for him to accept the results of the 2024 election if he loses. If a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling is optional, then every democratic mechanism we have is optional. This is the ultimate danger, a leader who has demonstrated that he believes no institution holds authority over him. So, how do we know if the system is actually breaking? There are 5 indicators we are tracking right now. First is the compliance deadline. The court gave Trump 30 days to begin liquidation. If we hit day 30 and nothing has moved, we are in a freefall. Second is the federal law enforcement response. If the FBI is ordered to move and they hesitate, the executive branch has fractured. Third is congressional intervention. If the House or Senate passes resolutions supporting this defiance, the legislative branch has joined the crisis. Fourth is military positioning. Any public statements from military leaders about their constitutional duty is a massive red flag. Finally, there is state-level resistance. If Republican governors start offering sanctuary for these properties, the very concept of federalism collapses. We are currently at 0 indicators triggered, but the clock is ticking. The first real test comes in exactly 96 hours. By Friday at 5:00 p.m., the Justice Department must file a compliance motion. That document will reveal the path we are on, cooperation or total obstruction. Tonight through tomorrow morning, watch the frequency of Truth's social posts. If there is silence, the lawyers are in control. If the posts continue, the situation is operating on raw instinct. By Wednesday afternoon, watch the Republican leadership. Their silence or their support will tell you if the party is going to survive the week. There is a possibility of a backroom deal, a scenario where the timeline is stretched from 30 days to 18 months to allow everyone to save face. But the Supreme Court seems to have anticipated this. They wrote this ruling specifically to block any delays or modifications. They are forcing a moment of truth: comply or defy. If Trump complies, the rule of law survives, but he remains a political force. If he defies, we are facing the most serious constitutional crisis in modern history. And there is one more thing you need to know. There is a sealed court filing mentioned in the ruling, evidence of systematic fraud that hasn't been made public yet. That filing drops in 14 days, and those who have seen it say it makes everything we've discussed today look like a footnote. I will be here the moment that drops. Hit that notification bell, share this analysis, and stay alert. The next 4 days will decide the future of the American experiment. Which way do you think this goes? Do you think he complies? Or is this the moment the line finally breaks? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be back with more as this develops. Stay safe.